Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 69. I'm Steve Kwan.
I'm Matt Kwan.
BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach.
69.
Yeah, I know. You're going to get a lot of maturity out of this episode because we decided that being episode 69, we cannot miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So, of course, this episode has to be about north-south position. There's really just no other topic that we can do on episode 69.
Yeah.
Yeah. The people demand maturity from us. So we have to, deliver on that maturity that everyone wants. So this is actually, all jokes aside, all terrible jokes aside, this is actually something that we've been thinking about doing for a while, which is digging deeper into a specific concept, like a specific position or even a specific submission. Normally on this show, we talk about higher level ideas, principles, strategies, philosophies, but a question that we get a lot is, can you give some examples? Can you talk about how exactly would you do this in practice? And I think one of the best ways to do that is to pick a position and to really deep dive into how that position works, why it's good, why it's bad, what mental models apply there. And that should hopefully bridge the gap between the things you do on the floor versus the things that we talk about here on the show. So 69, of course, is as good a time as any to talk about north-south, also known as the barbecue position.
Why is that?
Because you are putting your meat on the other guy's grill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course. I love telling that joke to white belts because they always find it really, really funny. Because, of course, we're all very, very mature adults in the jiu-jitsu community.
Yeah, I kind of almost consider the north-south position to almost be in a way, it's a variation of side control, just because it kind of bridges the two sides of side control together.
Yeah, what's interesting is I think if you were to ask most people to categorize it, I think most people would tell you that north-south is a variant of side control. But I kind of feel like it's really its own thing. It has a lot of strengths to it that you don't see if you're just playing side control. And you have a lot of mobility. And even within north-south itself, there are different variants of north-south that we should probably talk about here on the show. And I mean, as much as people like to complain about how bad it sucks to get stuck in side control, getting stuck in north-south is like 100 times worse because you can't really use your legs for much. Your opponent has so much mobility. Your neck and your arms are always at risk. And of course, you've probably got the guy's genitals hovering about an inch away from your mouth. So all of these things combined, it's a very unpleasant position to get yourself stuck in.
Yeah, it's a really tough position, and like you mentioned, the guy is usually so mobile on top. Like he can play that really low type of north-south game. That's the kind of game I prefer, where you basically do put your head over the guy's abdomen, like basically over his groin. And so also your groin is on top of his face. And then, any way that he turns, he gives you something. So he's either going to expose his back or he's going to expose a lever. It's really hard for the person on the bottom to create movement without giving you something to work with anyways. And just the fact that the person on top is so mobile, it makes it such a strong transitionary position. So I'm a big fan of north-south for sure. Me too.
So there's really, I would say, two main variants of north-south. There is the choke variant, which is if you envision a north-south choke, you're kind of almost chest to chest on the guy and you're usually sprawled out on top of him. That's where you would attack something like the north-south choke. And then there is the full barbecue position where you are literally 69ing on top of the person. The main functional difference is that if you're sprawled out on the person in a choking position, normally you have control of their head, but their arms are somewhat free. Whereas if you're on top of them in a barbecue position, I think in judo, they actually call it like the four corners pin, which is way more elegant than calling it the 69 or the barbecue position. But that variant where you're basically kind of like 69ing on top of the person, that has the benefit of not only being able to control their head, but you've also got their arms locked down pretty good too. And you have the ability to control their hips. Now, that proves especially important because although I wouldn't call it a great escape, some people are like spider monkeys. And if you're sprawled down on them in the choking position, some guys are able to basically backflip their way out of that and get onto your back. And it's always super embarrassing when that actually happens.
Yeah. There's always that one guy in the gym who's super flexible.
Yeah.
Or a 10th planet, it's everyone. Everyone can do that, right?
Yeah. So that's something that you have to be aware of if you're sprawled out in the choking position. But if you go up to the full barbecue position, then very, very hard to do that effectively.
Yeah. No, I like to go to north-south pretty much every time I pass the guard, I consider going to north-south, just because I find in that position I can stay ahead of the defense really well. Like if my partner is going to try and re-guard, I'm in a better, I can see everything happening in front of me. Whereas in side control, sometimes your partner, if they have a really slick guard, they can pummel their foot inside to a butterfly hook or trap your leg in a half guard or something like that. So I find just going all the way around kind of denies your opponent the access to your legs.
Yeah.
Really, really like that aspect of it. And for no-gi, when you can't really take grips and hold your opponent down easily, it's such a crucial transitionary position.
Yeah, I agree 100%. If you try to pass someone's guard and then just settle in side control, that's actually really hard to do, especially against someone who's good. I know when you're junior at jiu-jitsu, it feels like side control is just the worst and it's inescapable. But once you get more experienced, you actually realize it's pretty easy to get out of it as long as you don't burn your energy and you just keep on moving. And I find that against good guys, it's really hard to hold them in side control because they're just so squirmy. They'll shrimp, they'll frame, and then they're back out right away. So a very common strategy now is rather than going to side control, people basically just keep on going. They'll go right through to north-south. In some cases, they'll even go right through and go all the way around to side control on the other side, which has the benefit of opening up the person's back if they made the mistake of shrimping towards you and leaving their arm exposed. Because then when they shrimp towards you, you can grab them and you can lock them in that position. And then when you do a 180 and you transition through north-south and then you go to side control on the other side, if you've got their arm, you can hold them so that they're still looking away from you, and that opens up their back pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for more of the lower ranked people listening, I think if the top spin is a really important drill to have, just being able to transition from one side control to the other, because you're going to find yourself in that position. You're going to go against guys that start to wrestle up with an underhook and try and get on top from bottom side. It's just natural type of escape movement. So having that top spin is such an important position. And a lot of the time when your partner is turtling, they'll expose their back, or they will give you like access to a kimura or something like that. So really strong position north-south. I had an issue recently where I didn't usually put my forehead down on their groin because obvious gross reasons, but it is super effective. I was playing a lot of north-south where I'd put my head down next to their hips as a frame against one of their hips, and then my hand on the other side. And what I'd find is against really flexible guys, they'd be able to sort of scoot down and then invert and try and take your back, right? That's where that happens. So annoying, so embarrassing when that happens. So an adjustment you can make if you have that problem is literally put your head over their groin, or more elegantly put their belt, because that's going to prevent them from the inversion over your shoulder and getting their hooks in and whatnot. Because that is a real threat. Like, not everyone can do that move, and not every north-south can you do that move, but it can happen, especially if your opponent's really flexible. You can kind of scoot down, and I think that's one of the main ways you can escape that position is start to do the. I refer to it as the mechanic going under the car. It's kind of like the forward shrimping motion to scoot yourself down, but that essentially will work to escape your body positioning, so you can get your hooks back in and get your frames back. Yeah,
you got to be careful with that inversion where they basically like jump up and go around and take your back, because normally when you're the guy on top in a dominant position, it's not easy for the guy to get to your back. That really sucks. Like if you were in this incredibly dominant position and you managed to lose it, and as a result, not only has the guy gotten out or reversed, but he's actually gotten onto your back. That's definitely bad news. I'm not totally against the variant of north-south where you sprawl down on the guy and you go for like a north-south choke. The problem I've had with that is that the guy has so much mobility because you're just pinning their head. They can still scooch one way or the other way. They can still hand fight you. They can get their hands in and use them as frames. So I find that it's actually very hard to just hold a person there. Mm-hmm. And I similarly find it's very hard to finish the north-south choke because while you're trying to turn to cut the corner, because, with the north-south choke, normally you sprawl back and then you kind of turn your body to the side. Usually the other guy, because you're not really restraining him very well, he can kind of just sort of Homer Simpson and walk along the floor in a circle and follow you, and it makes it challenging. Whereas if you actually get up and go for the full 69 position, it's a lot harder for the guy to move. And now, in addition to just having that choke, You've got, you've got arm locks. You have like the triangle choke. You can even do some weird ass leg locks from there. So it's a much more dangerous position. I think the mistake a lot of people make with North-South is that position is so iconic because of the North-South choke that's all people think about, and they get obsessed with that move. But that's probably like, unless you're like Jeff Munson or something, that's probably like one of the lower percentage submissions from North-South, because most people will probably find better luck going for Kimuras for that position or triangles from that position.
Yeah, North-South Choke is it's a move that I do need to work on. I know Marcelo's released a bunch of stuff recently on the North-South Choke. Of course, Marcelo's got his butterfly guard DVD out. I mean, it took fucking too long to have that out. He should have put that out like a year or 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But now, I mean, if you want to learn butterfly guard, you learn it from the master, right? Marcelo Garcia. But he released a video recently on the North-South Choke, really in depth with the North-South Choke. And it's a move that I need to work more and more, because I think you're right. Like instead of going for North-South, I usually do look for the back more. Mm-hmm. I kind of use that position to cook my opponent and try and find other positions. But North-South is no joke, man. Like that is a real move. I have a few buddies that use it pretty frequently. So I think that hopefully when this virus thing goes over, we get back to training, I can hone that move a little bit more.
Yeah, I have found that one thing about North-South that does make it annoying is it doesn't matter how junior your opponent is. If they get you in North-South, like, you're in a legitimate trouble. I mean, if I'm sparring with like a white belt or a blue belt and I give them mount, I'm not really remotely concerned. If I give them my back, I'm a little bit more concerned. But when there's a big experience gap, usually you can feel pretty safe in those positions because you know what you're doing. But North-South, man, it's so hard to move. There's so much stuff that the other guy can do that if you get in that position, it doesn't matter if you're way bigger than the other person. It doesn't matter if you're way more experienced. You do not want to be the guy on bottom in North-South. It's very, very hard to defend from that position.
Yeah, one of my strategies on top is similar to my strategy when I have my opponent mounted, and that's literally like put your bare chest on their face or bare belly on their face. It's just such an annoying pressure. That's a real thing, man. Like getting your mouth and your nose covered, and it's demoralizing and gross and hard to move and hard to breathe. Especially hard to breathe, I think, if your partner is wearing a gi or, the cloth is in your face, mm-hmm. or if they're fat and hairy, it's really not a pleasant situation to be stuck in. Yeah, and I find in no-gi, when it can be difficult sometimes to get in certain passing positions, it's a really good position to go to, North-South, because usually against a high-level opponent, they'll keep moving, and then that allows you to open up other stuff. So
yeah.
I find in the gi, I like the butthole grip. You like that one?
The butthole grip.
Where you like reach around the guy's hip and then grab the seam underneath his butt crack.
Like the wedgie grip. The wedgie grip. That's not really my thing. That's just I'm calling it that now. I don't know. That's not really my thing.
I mean, it's not the most fun thing, but if you get that, it's so hard to get out. It's like a taint grip, basically.
It basically is.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the one thing that people probably will struggle with in North-South when they're the ones on top is it can be hard to figure out how do you attack this guy? Because normally when you get North-South on someone, probably what's going to happen is they're going to turtle up on you, right? Not like pull turtle, but I mean like they're going to shell up. They're going to make it very, very hard to get access to their neck or get access to their hands. And that's one of the unique things about North-South is that even when you're the guy on the bottom, you can still keep your alignment to some degree. You can keep your arms in, you can protect your neck to some extent, and you have pretty good base because your feet are totally free. So even if you're the person on the bottom in North-South, you can still move around a lot. And a challenge that I think a lot of people have in terms of, okay, how do I actually dominate from this position is how do I break the person's alignment? The benefit to other types of dominant positions like the mount or the back or even side control or knee on belly, the benefit there is that you are basically cutting your opponent's body in half, right? You're completely breaking the elbow-knee connection. And that's part of what allows you to hold those positions. But in North-South, in a lot of situations, it's kind of hard to do that because there's usually not much preventing your opponent from like getting their elbows and their knees together and shelling up. So they can actually keep alignment pretty well. That's one of the reasons why I think if you're going to attack from north-south, it's good to move towards kind of that four corners, like barbecue position pin, because then you can put your elbows down like in the person's armpits, and then they can't get their elbows and their knees back together. Because if you let them do that, they can turtle, they can shrimp. It's a really common way to get out of that position.
Yeah, the way I look at who is safe in the north-south position, because you're right, like the person on the bottom, I'm not saying, like, obviously you can do funky triangles and stuff from there, but it's probably not super likely. You're probably on the defensive. So I think what dictates sort of who's in a better position than the other person is just who has inside position. So if the person on top has their elbows in the armpits, like Steve mentioned, then they're effectively taking the inside position and separating the person on the bottom's arms from their body. Whereas if the person on the bottom has the inside position, then they'll be able to get their knees to their elbows. Their arms won't be isolated. They're going to have a way easier time inverting, and the person on top won't be able to expose their arms as levers. So it's really important to think about pummeling in this situation on the floor. Not so much, usually when you hear pummeling, you think about leg pummeling, you think about pummeling in wrestling, like standing positions. But a big part of what Gordon does with his passing and his positioning is who has the inside position. Because essentially once you take the inside position, you really start to isolate corners of your opponent's body, and you start to isolate levers as well.
Yeah, doing that is what is going to cut your opponent's body in half from north-south. If you don't take the inside position, meaning basically you use your arms and your elbows and you wedge them like into your opponent's armpits, if you don't do that, there's really nothing cutting their body in half, and they can rotate around. They can do that ridiculous backflip and take your back. They can turtle. It's going to be really, really difficult to control them. But as soon as you actually put something like a wedge in there so that they can't do that and they can't get their elbows and their knees kind of closer together, it restricts their motion and their movement. So yeah, inside channel pummeling is something that you definitely do from north-south. The other thing too that's interesting with north-south is in the gi, you can do inside channel pummeling from the underneath. Like you can reach under the person's armpits and you can grab the lapels from underneath like a backpack, and then you can just pull them up and take their back, which is one of my favorite things to do from that position.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like the collar grips under the armpits because there's really nothing the guy can do. Like it's such a strong position. You basically just deadlift them into the back position.
So hard to get out of.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing with the gi is once those grips are established by proxy, even if the person's really explosive, it's very difficult to control them, right?
Yeah, so, especially from that north-south position. Like it's really, really hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I feel like north-south is kind of it could be a missing piece to a lot of people's games, especially if they're struggling with side control and stuff like that. Like we were mentioning about pummeling the inside position and isolating arms. Another thing Marcelo shows is if you're fighting someone and you have let's say side control, for example, and they have the inside position, so you have not achieved the inside position. Like you don't have you don't have frames and wedges inside of your opponent's armpits because they're just doing a really good job of shelling up. He says that's when he starts attacking the neck, because usually the neck at that point will be exposed, like the head will be exposed because the partner is trying so hard not to let you access their arms as levers. So that's when he usually dives on the north-south. So that was kind of a cool takeaway, if your partner, like how Rob says, takes their ball and goes home, then you're able to just attack the neck right away. Another thing I like to do when people are shelled up, if I can't get the inside position, is I like to pop up to a knee ride. Like
definitely.
I think knee on belly from north-south is just, it goes hand in hand. And not just knee on belly, but reverse knee on belly, and
also known as like knee on neck.
Well, no, I actually think that that's slightly different, because reverse knee on belly, you could also put your knee, the opposite knee, in the same position. But knee on neck is, I definitely use a lot. Like basically knee on shoulder / chest area. That's a great position because usually when you go there, it immediately opens up the knee on belly.
Yeah, that's what I do. So if I'm like on top in north-south and the guy's just giving me nothing, like he's basically, he's got his arms tucked, his head tucked. He's not even really trying to get out of there. He's just content if he survives. One of the things I'll do is I'll pop up to reverse knee on belly, which basically means you've got the way that I'm doing it in particular, you've kind of got your knee like on top of the guy's neck or his shoulder. And that will almost always force a response where they have to turn back towards you. And then from there, you can easily transition into regular knee on belly and the arms start to become exposed. And so usually when someone is in a position like north-south, one of the ways that you can force them to open up is by creating movement on top. If this is one of the unique benefits of north-south, because if you're on, say, the person's back, if they shell up, you can't really create that much movement because you're sort of tied to the person and they might even be on top of you. But from north-south, if the person is really, really shelled up, if you just transition back and forth, the side control, the knee on belly, it makes it very challenging for them to keep their alignment while you're doing that.
Yeah, and you have gravity on your side, so you can just like knee ride them.
Yeah,
you can be as mean as you want with the knee ride.
Just grind them into the mat. Yeah, it's really unpleasant.
Like that knee on shoulder where you drive your shin and knee cap into their neck is so effective because it just redirects their face. They can't even see what's going on down below because your knee is in the way, and then from there so much stuff opens up from there. That's such a strong position.
Yeah. So I mean I would generally suggest if you're playing with someone who is very defensive from north-south, that's probably the single best way to actually get them to open up, is to just take advantage of the fact that from that position you have a lot of mobility and you can move from position to position. And another thing to remember is that, I mean, although you get points for passing the guard, you don't get points for north-south. I mean, theoretically, you've already got them. But if you transition a lot and then you transition to knee on belly, that is points. And then from there, it's pretty easy most of the time to get to mount. And that's a lot of points. So that's another reason why transitions are so important to keep in mind from that position. Like really the power of side control and north-south is mobility. It's not so much about weight. That's a mistake that I made for a long time, is I thought side control and north-south were all about just being heavy. That's part of it. But the most important advantage of those positions is you have a massive mobility advantage over your opponent, combined with having gravity on your side.
Mm-hmm. And one of the main problems you'll find when you go to north-south on someone is they're going to immediately start framing away and trying to make space and try and get their knees and elbows back together, like we mentioned. So a couple of things that have helped me a lot is where you keep your head. And like we already talked about, you can put your head on the floor, you can put your head over their junk, you can be a little bit further back where your head is in like a north-south choke position. I find just making sure that you keep your head and shoulders below their knee line when they're trying to bring their knees back to their elbows. Like if your head is above their knees, then they're going to get their knees inside. They're going to get their knee to elbow connection. But if you keep your head low, it's really hard for your opponent to get knee elbow connection.
Well, it also makes it a lot harder to get inadvertently clipped in the head, which is something
that's true too. That's really important.
That is something you need to think about. Like, let's not even get into self-defense. Obviously, this is applicable for self-defense too. But if you are even in a,
but you can bite your dick off.
but like even in a friendly training environment or a competition, if the guy is really scrambly, you do have to think about the odds of getting clipped in the head with the person's knee. If your head is really low to the person, then it's very hard for them to do that. And in fact, it may not even be possible in a lot of cases for the person to knee you in the head. That's one of the advantages to keeping low. And the problem with keeping low from like the choking position, the north-south choke, is usually the guy can get his hands in there and can establish frames. Whereas if you're up in the more barbecue-ish position, it's actually pretty hard for them to do that because their hands are no longer right in front of your face, right? Their junk is in front of your face. And as far as I know, it's hard to frame with your junk. So that's usually a better position for your head to be in, once you can get past the social awkwardness of the whole thing.
Yeah, unless you're full erect, then it's easier to create a frame.
Yeah. Then it comes down to like size and girth. Yeah. And then I guess in that case you could use it as a frame. And honestly, it would probably be effective enough that it would stop the roll entirely. But
that's right.
In the normal case, that's not a good frame.
Yeah, that was a good point you brought up about how you get clipped, because that is such a real thing. And in terms of head positioning, like keeping your head low where it's not physically possible to be struck, and that happens in other positions too. Like when that happens in so many different positions, even a reverse side control, you could get smashed in the face with a knee, or if you're on your partner's back, if your head is not beside your partner's head, they could totally throw a headbutt backwards. It's just not and it's just more effective to have your head next to your partner's head in that position. So that's a really good point.
So on the topic of head position, which we talked about quite recently, this is a situation where head position is critically important. In a lot of other positions, head position is important, but it's not necessarily the key factor. In North-South, head position is one of the most important things.
That's right.
And the reason why is because just due to the fact that you guys are inverted on each other, your head is kind of going to be the primary target for the person. And it's going to be very easy for them to get their elbows, their hands right up into your face. That's actually one of the things that makes North-South hard to hold, is if the person is able to get their elbows and hands in and use them as frames and basically like elbow your face away. It's very hard to just continue to pressure them. So head position is so important when you're playing North-South on the top, because not only do you have to worry about framing, you don't want to make it easy for the guy to frame against your face. You got to worry about errant strikes from the knees. And also you have to worry about weird new age chokes. Matt, you mentioned that it is technically possible to get triangled from North-South. It's also possible to get darsed from North-South on the top. If your head is in the wrong position, right? If it's like in the guy's armpit, it can be done if you're not paying attention to where your head and your arm are. So it's very important to keep your head in a safe position. I generally like to keep it, kind of like, we keep saying this, but basically over the guy's junk or over his belly button, right? If you don't want to be totally creepy.
That's right. And if you think about it, if you're in that north-south position, like if your head is high, then there's going to be space between your torso and their torso. But if your head is like within sniffing range, then you're going to have better connection and more pressure essentially down on them. So another thing that can happen from the top when they're framing is like, you're going to come across eventually when you go to north-south enough, you're going to come across guys that are able to get their arms on the inside and they're framing and making space. And if you give them too much time, it's just a matter of time before they invert into a stronger position and get their guard back.
Yeah.
So I find just learning different ways to redirect the frames are really important. Like one of my favorite ones is the knee on shoulder, because if someone is framing away with their arms, you just pop up to that knee on shoulder position, and then you can actually pin their arm with your knee, and then you isolate that arm as a lever. So you've actually progressed your attack by shutting down their frame, and now you're in a position where you can focus two hands on the other arm, which is really cool. But that's again another position where you could eat a shot to the face if you're not careful.
What you're really talking about here is force vectors, right? When you're the person on the top, usually from north-south, the person on the bottom is going to create a very powerful frame with their arms, like almost immediately. And that's going to make it hard to get at their head, hard to get at their arms. And if you just keep trying to pancake on top of them and use body weight, it's not going to work. But if you can recognize the force vector, like basically that they're using their arms to prop you up from the exact angle your weight is coming from. Again, if you just keep transitioning from side to side, it makes it very hard for them and very tiring for them to continuously match that force vector. So they might have a frame, like they might have their elbows and their forearms up right in your face, but if you keep transitioning to side control on one side and then onto the other side and then reverse knee on belly and then knee on belly, they're not going to be able to match that force vector the whole time. Eventually, they're going to miss the angle, and that's when you can catch the arm and break their alignment.
Yeah. In terms of escaping north-south, should we talk about escaping, or are you going?
No. Once you get there, you're basically cooked. It's done.
There is no escape. It's the perfect jiu-jitsu position.
Well, maybe, actually we should do that, but maybe before we do, we could talk a little bit about some of the submission options from there. Of course, there is the north-south choke. That is, the way that I was always taught this is, once you get that north-south headlock, you basically sprawl back, and you use your lat to basically drive into the guy's head. And then once you've sprawled back, you kind of walk your body to the side and make him turn away. The reality is, though, unless you've got really big, strong arms, from my experience at least, and, let me know, listeners, if you've had a different experience. From my experience, if the guy taps, it's probably because it was a crank. But again, what works.
North-south?
Yeah, that's what I find. Maybe,
it can be a crank. It's also a choke.
Yeah, it definitely is for a lot of people. For me, that's personally my experience. But when you go up to that four corners barbecue position, it opens up a lot more options. And one of my favorite things to actually do is to put my knee on top of one of the guy's arms. And then start trying to grab the other arm. And that's how you kind of open up the inverted triangle from that position, right?
The Chinese buffet?
The Chinese buffet.
That's one of my favorites from that position. Effective.
Yeah, so if the person starts trying to hip to one side and they put one of their arms on the floor, I will basically immediately put my knee on top of that arm to pin it there. And that leaves that person in the unfortunate state where they've got one arm pinned to the floor because my knee is on top of it. And then I've got two hands to attack their other one hand. And you can triangle, you can Kimura, you can armbar, you can wrist lock, you can even do absolutely crazy shoulder submissions from there. It's a really powerful position to be in.
You're talking about the Chinese buffet, right?
Yeah. So what Mike Lee calls the Chinese buffet, where basically you're playing the inverted triangle game from north-south.
Yeah, and if you're effective enough, your partner gets coronavirus.
Oh God. Should we remind the listeners, because it's been a while since we've talked about this, why do we call it the Chinese buffet?
Yeah, I think it's just because there's so many options from there. It's sort of why.
I love how you guys call the inverted triangle that everyone else calls the inverted triangle. There's no confusion about the name, but you had to rename it to the Chinese buffet simply so that you could make that joke about how, well, there's so many things to choose from. I think that's pretty great.
It's a Mike Lee thing. I don't know. He's an old school guy, and that's what he calls it. So it's sort of stuck. It's a pretty great name.
It is, actually. And if the person does somehow bring their feet up into your face, you do have the option to abandon the position and go for like toe holds and knee bars from there, depending on what they do. I don't consider that to be a particularly common attack plan, simply because it sort of relies on your opponent throwing your foot in their face, their foot in your face. And you also have to kind of abandon the position to go for it. But I mean, if the opportunity's there, you can take it. If the guy is leaving his feet unprotected, you can knee bar the person from north-south. You can toe hold. So that is a possibility that you have to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. I like when people turtle from there, because they're basically in they have to go through a shitty, as Gordon calls it, unathletic position. Mm-hmm. As they're turning and giving you their back, there's that moment where they're completely open. In the gi, if the person on top grabs that rear collar, horse collar grip, it's just they can follow you anywhere. Especially if you have rolling back takes and things like that in your game. So. Yeah, it really sucks. It's not a great position to be stuck in on the bottom, honestly.
But maybe we should talk about that now. Maybe we should talk about, what do you do when you're the guy on the bottom? Because I think that's probably a very relatable situation for a lot of people, right? You're on the bottom in north-south. You can't see anything because there's testicles in your face.
You smell stuff.
Yeah, I know. You feel morally demoralized. You feel like you need to take a very, very long shower, and you don't know how you're going to get submitted because there's so many options. So
morally demoralized.
Morally demoralized.
Yeah, and if your partner needs a maintenance wipe, it's even way worse.
God. Oh God, I'm having flashbacks now because I think we've all been there.
This position is going to be outlawed when jiu-jitsu comes back. We're not even allowed to be near each other right now.
Yeah, I know.
What I saw Lachlan Giles show an escape recently that has basically become my go-to escape from north-south. I mean, before my go-to would always be, move enough until you can get your knees and elbows together, and then from there create an inverted guard, and then from there dig yourself out in regard. But there is times when your partner's head is just in that barbecue position. They're so low that you can't really move, and one thing he does that I think is really awesome is basically he almost uses his legs like pendulums, and he brings his leg to the side of his partner's head, and then he collapses his partner's head to the ground by turning his hips to the side, and momentarily it redirects their posture away, and then from there he kind of it's almost I don't know what you call it. It's kind of like a fishtail movement where he moves kind of back and forth until he can create enough movement to get his knees back to his elbows. It's a really cool escape, and it basically just all it does is it accesses your partner's head as a lever using your legs, right? So even if your arms are completely out of commission, what you can do is still your opponent can't really control your legs from that position.
Yeah, that is one of the things about north-south that can make it hard to control as the guy on the top, is you really don't have a good way to control the person's legs. And that's probably going to be related to how they eventually get out. So if I understand correctly, you're saying he's basically kind of penduluming his legs from one side to the other until eventually he can create the space and create the opportunity to get up and turtle.
Yeah, basically with his thigh, he's smashing the guy in the head to the side, and if you don't have a follow-up movement, obviously the guy can just recenter and he's back in position, but it creates movement, right? Because in that position, I think that's really the first step in terms of escaping, is how can you create some movement to get your frames back, kind of like a bad side control or something like that. Is how do you create that first movement? And it was really interesting, and it's super effective. You can use that there's nothing stopping you from rocking your legs from one side to the other. And you can actually generate a lot of like I use this term fishtail, but it's like a whipping movement. And when you whip your legs out like that, you can actually kind of sometimes extract your torso from under your partner's body. And then as soon as you get your knee elbow connection, you're working with a guard again. So
Interesting.
yeah, you haven't seen it, eh?
No, I haven't seen it. So yeah, send it to me if you've got it. We can maybe even post it on social if it's free. That's an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, for me, when it comes to getting out of north-south, there's kind of different options depending on what type of north-south we're talking about. Like if we're talking about north-south choke north-south, right? I mean, kind of the way that a lot of people try to get out of that variant of north-south is they try to frame against the guy's head. That's very predictable though. And the problem with doing that is, like we just discussed, if the guy transitions to the side, your arm might wind up getting exposed. Something that I do now, and I don't know if I would recommend it across the board, but it's worked well for me. I'll actually use my hands to cup the person's head on top. So if I've got a person, like if I'm on the bottom and they're north-south on me in kind of the choking position, so they're not in like the 69, it's very important. You don't reach up and reach your hand around their head because you don't want to let them get control of your elbow. But I keep my elbows tucked in against my ribs, but I cup the back of their head with my hands. And then from there, there's two benefits. One is everyone I train with knows I'm a sneaky little fuck. So they know I'm probably going to try to Ezekiel them from the north-south. And they know I'll probably actually get it if they let me. But the other benefit is it creates a tracking frame. Like I basically, if I can cup the back of the person's head and keep my elbows tucked in tight, I can start shrimping and hip escaping. And it makes it harder and harder for them to follow me because I'm using my hands as a frame to keep their head where it needs to be. It also makes it harder for them to transition from side to side because I've got their head. And then eventually from there, normally I can get out and turtle or escape in some other manner. If on the other hand, the person is in the 69 position, for me, the most important thing is I know it's very tempting when the guy's like got that 69 on you to turn to your side and hip escape, but you got to be super careful doing that because if you leave your arm on the ground and exposed, like we just talked about when you're the guy on top, you want to be very careful of the guy putting his knee on top of your arm because once that happens, you're probably going to get submitted right away, right? Like if someone is barbecuing me and I hip escape, yeah, I turn to my side to hip escape, but I leave my arm dangling on the ground and then they bring up their knee or their shin and they put it on my bicep. Now that arm is pinned to the ground. Now my other arm, I can't really prevent the guy from just grabbing it and taking a kimura, taking an arm bar. So the important thing is if you are going to try to hip escape as the one on the bottom, be mindful not to let the guy put his weight or put his knee and his shin down on top of your bicep. That to me has been kind of the thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, if you get your guard passed and you feel like the north-south is coming, just remember the person on the bottom or the person on top, the person who has the inside control is going to be usually the person who can either control the position or escape the position, right? So always, again, just talking about structures, just keeping your arms close to your body and being able to reclaim knee-elbow connection is kind of the name of the game here. And if you get deep into the north-south position, then you can use the escape that I referred to earlier. So
yeah,
maybe we should do a video or something on that.
Yeah, maybe we should. I mean, north-south is an ultra powerful position. That's one thing that I hope you guys have kind of got out of this chat. It's I think very underutilized compared to a lot of the other positions. It is sometimes hard to finish guys from there, but it's such a powerful transition into other options. And if you do keep active, it is not too difficult to break the person's alignment and get their arm or their neck exposed. So I think the mistake a lot of people make is they just go to north-south and they basically just like sit on the guy and they hope their body weight's going to be enough. But against a good guy, that probably isn't the case. You've got to introduce some motion and transition in order to actually open something up.
Yeah, and it's just like side control. Like, you can't just hold side control just because you're a big guy. Like Danaher says, you kind of need to put wedges around their body. And I think north-south is pretty much the exact same thing. You need to have wedges around your opponent's body so that it limits their movement and their ability to hip escape. And then, of course, keeping a mindset that's based towards transitions and movements and being prepared to stay behind the defense. That's kind of what you want to do on top. Looking at either isolate levers or expose the back or expose their head.
Yeah, north-south is a great position when it comes to predictable responses because it's very easy to put your opponent in a situation where you can checkmate them. There's once you've got someone in north-south, there's only so many things that they can do. You can lead them down the path to what you want based on what you do, and it gets pretty easy to kind of funnel the situation into whatever you want to happen, as long as you are ready for it. The mistake that I think some people make is that, like, when the guy on the bottom is starting to frame and he's starting to get out, they try to just like be heavier and squish harder. That's not going to work. Yeah. If the guy is starting to frame and get out, you have to be ready to move to a different position. So again, that would be like reverse knee ride or side control or something like that. So my suggestion is, if you are going to add north-south as an offensive weapon to your game, one of the big benefits to it is to understand that there are some really obvious predictable responses, and it's pretty easy to make your opponent make a mistake that you can then capitalize on from there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Cool. That was actually a pretty good chat. Anything else you want to add?
Not really.
Yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive. Yeah, so this
questions?
We always have questions. We always have questions, of course. But before we do that, of course, we gotta recap. We always gotta recap. So on this episode, of course, when we talked about north-south, really the big differentiator for north-south is who has alignment. If the person on the bottom is able to keep their alignment, they're probably going to be there for quite a while, and they're probably going to be able to stay relatively safe. That is one of the things about north-south that makes it kind of an interesting feature, is it's often still possible for the person on the bottom to keep their alignment and have really, really good base. So if you're having trouble being successful from north-south, what that probably means is that you need to focus on breaking the person's alignment. Usually that means you've got to get like their arm or their head exposed. We talked about the elbow-knee connection. So from north-south, one of the best ways to get out of that position is to try to connect your elbow and your knee together. In fact, very hard to get out if you are not able to do that. So conversely, if you're the person on top, what that tells you is that you need to put a wedge between your opponent's, their arm and their leg. So usually that means you're going to be wedging your elbow into their armpit, for example, and that's going to make it really hard for them to escape. We talked about inside channel control. So north-south is very much a fight for the inside channel. You always want to try to pin your opponent by putting something, again, in their armpit. That's basically the inside channel in this case. And if your opponent is able to prevent you from doing that, that's going to be how they're able to frame, and that's how they're going to be able to escape. We talked about head position. So head position is super, super critical in north-south because your head is going to be, in most cases, right in front of your opponent's arms, or it's going to be within striking distance of their legs, or you could even expose yourself to some crazy choke. So proper head positioning is really critical in north-south, and you want to make sure that you don't put your head in a position where you could get injured or could get like an elbow in the face as well as a knee. As a result, usually the safest place to put your head is to kind of keep it down low, and of course keep it like right in the person's junk. Yeah. or above their belly button if you want to be
smelling range.
Yeah, if you want to be a little bit more civil. We talked about force vectors. So this is a concept that Rob has talked about, but really I think he just stole it from grade 9 physics. Basically, the idea behind force vectors.
I think he stole it from Danaher.
Yeah, probably. What we're talking about here is when someone is creating a frame, they're creating that frame to absorb force at a certain angle. And it's not effective to just drop all of your weight on top of that frame, because if the angle is right, they can support you all day long. What you want to do is change the angle, and that will render the frame inert. So where this comes into play here is from north-south. If your opponent is shelling up and they're propping you up on top of their forearms and you just can't get an arm free, try transitioning. Change the angle. Change to side control, knee ride, reverse knee ride. A lot of options from there. And by doing that, you'll be able to create an opening and eventually expose something. And last but not least, of course, we talked about predictable responses. One of the most powerful things about the north-south position is that there are very predictable responses to what your opponent does, and their options are generally quite slim. So it's pretty easy to be able to guess what they're going to do, and it's pretty easy to come up with a game plan to capitalize on the mistakes that they make.
Yeah, one thing I think about the north-south position is like just from the way your bodies are aligned, you kind of have like I don't want to say bird's eye view of the situation, but you have like a, I didn't mean it like that, but I just mean like you have a perfect view of like their hips. You can see where their legs are. In side control, sometimes you don't really know where their legs are. Like, you know, they can be, if a guy's really tricky with his feet in terms of regarding and things like that, it can be harder to stay ahead of the defense sometimes, I find. But in North-South, I feel like I can always, I always have like a play to make, you know. I feel like you're at a position where, like you said, you basically funneling your opponent into a predictable response that's always bad.
Yeah.
So I just think that you're kind of just from your orientation, you can see more from that position.
You sure can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always got to make it about cocks.
Of course. Well, that's kind of, speaking of which, you're going to love this email. Okay. So listener writes in and says, Listener writes in and says, my country is going into full lockdown on Wednesday. My gym has closed also. Fortunately, my work is going to stay running as it is required for essential services. Plenty I can do to keep fit for when I can get back on the mats, and that includes starting from episode number 1 again on BJJ Mental Models. Of course, the best thing that you can do is to rewind right back to the first episode and spend another 70 hours of your life listening to us talk about like dicks and taints. Absolutely the best use of your time.
Wow.
I love you guys. Best banter and technical advice for BJJ I have found so far in this format. Just learning the knee-elbow connection has helped strengthen my defense big time, and now I'm playing turtle a lot. And I love this guy already.
Boo!
Yeah. Still a bit unsure about smashing people's taints, as I'm not sure how they will take it. Do you ease the foot in there? I don't want to
stomp, baby.
I don't want to knock any nutsacks and hurt anyone.
Hey, they can get swept.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a choice.
Anyway, if the world goes back to normal soon, it would be great to one day come and learn some taint-based sweeps. Maybe you guys can do an online lesson during this time. Cheers, guys. You are a credit to the jiu-jitsu community. Stay safe and well. Awesome email. I'm all about any emails that ask about the technical aspects of taint manipulation. That is, of course, the main thesis of this show. Yeah. So I think what he's trying to get at is like, there is a degree of course, discomfort in terms of like, you know, using the ball of your foot to prop someone's taint up and push them over. Now, I got to say this, the way that Rob describes it and the way that we have then stolen in terms of the nomenclature, when you call it the taint sweep, it sounds like the most vile thing you could ever do to someone, but it's actually not. So Rob put out a very easy to find YouTube video describing this. In fact, this may have been the thing that made Rob famous more than anything. Just Google taint sweep. Actually, you know what? Google jujitsu taint sweep, just so that you don't attract any false positives that you don't want. Rob Bernacki did an instructional with Stefan Kesting. There's just like a free short clip you can find on YouTube where he explains this move.
Yeah, it's the Nogi Delahiva formula.
Yeah. It's probably easier for just to go there and take a look at what we're talking about, but it's actually not as bad as it sounds. Like when we describe it, we make it sound like you're basically kicking the guy in the taint, but that's not exactly it. Basically what you're doing is you're like grabbing the guy's legs and controlling his legs, and then you're extending your own foot up. And that puts him in this awkward position where he's sort of like propped up on your foot, kind of like when you're riding a bicycle, you know, when you've got like a bicycle seat under you, except that unlike with a bike, like imagine what it would be like on a bicycle if you had to sit there
on the point of it.
Yeah, you're sitting on it and you can't use your legs, like unless the bike is moving, you're going to fall over, right? So that's kind of what the taint sweep is. You grab both of the guy's legs, and then with the ball of your foot, like against their taint, or you can even their like adductor,
penis, vagina, any of those genitals, gooch.
You basically just kind of like tip the guy over. It's actually not as bad as you would think. Like if you were to do this,
it's fucking bad. What do you mean it's not bad? It sucks to get taint swept.
It sucks, but like it's not like it's going to hurt the guy or be like most people. If you do that to them, unless you tell them I'm going to taint sweep you, like they won't even think there's anything untoward about it. They'll think it's just a regular sweep. So it's actually fine from my perspective.
You see that sweep in so many different places. Like you could imagine that. What I know the taint sweep from would be like a De La Hiva position.
Yeah. And
then using the Kazushi that Rob mentions in his instructional, you can sort of bring the guy over top of you, and then you really drive the ball of your foot home and extend your De La Hiva hook completely straight.
Yeah.
I mean, it sucks for the person on top, but it's not like they're there for a long time. Like usually they just get swept. Yeah.
And it actually doesn't, from my experience, like it doesn't hurt because the guy is standing.
Well, of course for you it doesn't hurt.
But the guy is standing up, right? So when you extend your leg, like it's not like all of that pressure is going right into his junk or anything. Like his legs are still flexible, so he's just going to fall over. It's not going to hurt anybody.
I mean, it is pretty uncomfortable, especially if your partner on the bottom has like a double pant grip, which is the I think the most efficient way to do it. Then you just go over like a tree basically.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then the other situation I can see the taint sweep would be in like an ashigarami type position where your partner gets really high over top of your head and shoulders, and then you can pummel the outside foot on the hip around and go basically double taint sweep, which is just absolutely
double taint sweep. So like, who has two taints?
Oh, I mean like 2 feet.
Oh, 2 feet.
2 feet inside one taint. Yeah, like I think that's some people call it the kuru guard. It's like you're basically doing like a dick stomp on the inside.
Yeah, basically
with the single leg X type position.
Yeah. Is this the same thing that Rob also calls the dick post?
Yeah, I mean basically these are both examples of dick posts.
Yeah, so like when Rob is not talking about alignment, he's talking about like dick and taint based manipulation. So this is actually a really powerful strategy from X guard. Is if you're getting like squished in X guard, you know, or single leg X. So if you've got single leg X guard and Uki like hunkers down on you and they put your weight down and you just can't move them. One of the things that I know Rob has shown is you release the hook that you have on the outside and you bring it around to the inside.
Right. Yeah.
So now
that is the dick post.
Yeah. So now you've got both of your feet in between the guy's legs, and then from there you basically
fire away.
Yeah. You basically grab. You make sure you've got both legs grabbed, and then you just let nature take its course.
Yeah, I've seen that very commonly in jiu-jitsu right now, and I've heard people call it the inside hook. I've heard
people call it the dick post.
I prefer dick post. It's a little bit more on the nose.
Well, it's a bit more on the something. The thing I love about the dick post, though, is can you imagine, like I've always told you and Rob this, like you guys probably need a better name, because if you start doing that in competition and the coach is yelling out like, hey, go dick post, you know, I think you might get into a situation where the ref might wise on to whether or not that should or shouldn't be done.
No, we got to call it something that's not inappropriate that no one will know what it is. Do the DP.
Yeah. Number 2. Anyway.
Oh my God.
Cool. So we talked about a lot today. We talked about North-South. We talked about taints. We talked about the dick post. This was a very mature episode, but what do you expect out of episode 69, really?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So plug time. That's also very mature.
Oh, God.
Yeah. If for some reason you liked this content, you can, of course, support us on Patreon. That's our big home base right now. So as you know, of course, with the COVID-19 outbreak, Matt and I are kind of looking for anything that we can do to supplement our income. And I mean, so many people have supported us on our Patreon, and we can't thank you enough. But definitely the more the merrier. We need to keep driving on that. We need more support there. So patreon.com/BJJ Mental Models. Again, that's patreon.com/BJJ Mental Models. We've got multiple tiers there. If you, for example, go for the $5 tier, you get all of our episodes early. So as soon as I record them, you get them there. You don't have to wait for the regular Monday schedule. If you're on the $10 tier, then in addition to that, we're going to start putting out premium content or podcast content that goes above and beyond what we talk about on the show. What we've specifically thought about so far is doing very specific tactical podcasts, much like this one, actually. One of the things I would like to do is maybe do an episode on every single position and every single major submission and just talk about those in depth. But that's something that we'll probably put on the premium tier and not the regular tier. We also are probably going to start talking about competition and game planning, and that would be something we would likely put there as well. And if you want to go onto the top tier, the $20 tier, then you'll get more direct access to us in addition to everything else already on offer. You will also get the opportunity to have live Q&As with us, to do virtual seminars. Matt and I have actually already started figuring out how we're going to do this. So we started acquiring the necessary equipment to make this happen. We want to start running virtual seminars for you guys, especially now when, unfortunately, we're all locked at home. Really, anything that we can do to bring each other together and to train together, I think is going to be great for all of us. So we want to start doing that. In addition to that, though, of course, if you want to learn more about what we talk about on the show, you can go to bjjmentalmodels.com. That's our website that links off to everything, the Patreon, our store. It also has a database of all of the mental models that we talk about on this show if you want a more detailed write-up of those concepts. You can go to bjjmentalmodels.com/store. From there, you can buy gi patches, you can buy t-shirts. This is another great way beyond the Patreon to support the show. You can go to bjjmentalmodels.com/join, where we have a mailing list. We provide more content on the mailing list as well as show notes for these episodes here. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us, there's a contact form on the website. You can also contact us on social or follow us there to get updates. We're active on Facebook and on Instagram, and we'd love to have a follow there if you would like to.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for all your contributions. Really appreciate it. And even more flattering is I think the fact that people want to dedicate this amount of time to listen to us talk.
I know.
I still don't even believe that that's a thing, and very flattering and very appreciative of you guys. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think now is maybe a situation where more than anything, people are looking for something to do, right? I mean, so many of our regular routines have been taken away from us, at least for a while. So, man, if there's anything that we can do to fill that hole. This is a super mature episode.
All those bitches that were like, you guys need to stop making jokes.
They're all going to unsubscribe.
They're freaking out right now.
Yeah, they're all going to unsubscribe after this episode. And frankly, I don't think I blame them. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. Stay safe. Stay indoors. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your families. This is an unprecedented, odd time, but hopefully all of this drama is over soon.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
Take care.